In this episode of We Do a Little, we are joined by Drew Dinkmeyer. Drew is the head of NBA at Establish the Run, one of the highest winning DFS players in the world, and just an overall charitable Chad. We dive into his background doing qualitative research and investment banking, his lifelong love of fantasy sports and gambling history, playing collegiate tennis, and so much more. As always, this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Andy, D's, and guests may own NFTs discussed.
This is Andy.
Yeah, I'm D's.
All right, awesome. Well, welcome to another episode of Season 2 of We Do a Little. We're joined by Drew Dinkmeyer today, who is a little bit different than a lot of our other guests, but we're really excited to talk. He is a very successful daily fantasy sports player and now runs NBA content for Establish the Run. Also, based on some research I did, he is tied for the second most wins in Dartmouth men's tennis history, I believe. So lots of fun things to talk about. Super excited for this convo. How's your morning going?
It's great. It's even better when you remind me of my old athletic glory. So thank you for starting the conversation off right.
Yeah, I was like, this morning I was sitting having my coffee and I was like, all right, what can I learn about Drew that's like not daily fantasy sports related? And I just Googled your name and I saw that you played tennis and I was like, I feel like I've heard like Mike Levy mentioned that you play tennis. Like, all right, let me look into this. It's like, oh shit, he was really good.
I was good on a bad team. We were really, really bad in my 4 years at Dartmouth. I think we won 5 conference matches in my 4 years.
And how many matches are you playing?
So you play 7 a year, so 28. So I think we went 5 and 23 in conference in my 4 years there. And I had the pleasure of being good enough. So we were really bad, meaning we had like our number 1 player was just as good as me. I was our number 3 player.
Okay.
And so our number 1 player who just, he won't admit it to this day, but he had something on my serve and I was a serve and volleyer. And so like I could not beat him in ladder matches to get better seeding on our team. So I had the benefit of playing 3 all the time and playing the third best player on other teams when our number 1 guy was just a sacrificial lamb out there. I mean, just going out and getting pounded each and every day. And I just like watch his matches and I'd be like, you know what? I was always pissed that I could never like beat him and beat the number 1 guy. And I'd like watch his matches while I'm like hanging in there and doing okay. And I'd be like, you know, this is a better life.
The grass is always greener.
Exactly.
I mean, you're watching this guy just go out and lose, and you're like, yeah, maybe I'm gonna like sandbag our one.
Exactly. Just like the ladder match is just like, you know, like throw a double fault in a key point, and you know, just you know, tank a little bit.
How did you get into tennis? Was that like a lifelong thing from early childhood, or?
Yeah. So my dad played college tennis and college basketball at a small D3 school, and he fell in love with tennis late as like a high school kid. And was just really naturally athletic. And then he ended up teaching tennis as a profession. So I grew up playing tennis since I was like 2 or 3 years old. I had a racket in my hand. And I quit when I was 9 because I was just like, I want to play other sports. And I gave it up for like 3 or 4 years. But my dad was a teaching professional. So we had a tennis court in our backyard. And he was running lessons all the time. And I'd see all these kids that I was friends with doing well. And I eventually kind of got jealous and wanted to get back into it. And then got back into it when I was like 12 or 13 and started playing at a more serious level at that.
Do you still play now, or are you have you adapted to pickleball, or what?
I haven't played pickleball. I know Overzet will be proud. I do play tennis once a week now. I stopped playing pretty cold turkey after college. I was pretty burnt out. Yeah. And now I'm playing like once a week with friends who didn't play at the collegiate level. They played recreationally, and it's just like doubles, and it's fun and it's low key. It's a challenge though, because I go out there and my mind thinks my body can do things that it just can't do. And so like so I'll go out there and I'll have fun for like an hour and a half, and then I'll feel pain for like 3 days after of just like muscles that I'm not using in regular life, and just like it's a struggle getting older.
Yeah, I definitely am not looking forward to that. I like in a very different way. I've been like kind of in and out of living situations for the last like 6 months, and sort of finally settled back in. And so I've finally gotten back to the gym, and I did like my first very real leg day last week. and my legs are still sore. I've been limping around the apartment for like a week. And so, you know, it's a little bit different, but
It's such
I
a
feel that
struggle.
pain. Yeah.
It's such a struggle.
While you were in college, I think we have this right. You were an investment banker.
So I wasn't in investment banking. I was working for an institutional investment consulting firm.
Okay.
So I was doing research on money managers, essentially.
Nice.
So it's actually like a lot of people, when they hear I had a finance background, they think it was very like quantitative, and there was a lot of financial modeling and different things like that. And a lot of my job was actually more qualitative. It was more, you know, sitting down with investment managers and investment management teams and assessing how they interacted together and what their processes were, and like building a whole process to analyze that, which was a really interesting learning experience about the finance and investment world in general.
What do you think is the most important thing you learned focusing on the qualitative over the quantitative at your time there?
So I think culture is just really important in every business. And I think you can tell when people genuinely enjoy spending time together and working together, and you can tell when people don't. And I remember we came up with all these different metrics that we were trying to make a qualitative process quantitative. And we came up with all these metrics around turnover and different things like that. And it really showed up. Like there were a number of times where everybody would be focused on, okay, like the portfolio manager just left or different things like that. But like 3 analysts in this sector just leave. And like you start to see it like have an impact over time. And so continuity and turnover were something that we were trying to quantify and understand, but it was also like, how important is the team member? And you can get a good feel just by sitting down and talking to people. And we would have quarterly catch-ups with all these investment managers. So I would learn a lot about them and the team. And that was the biggest thing to me, was just kind of realizing early on that a good culture creates a lot of hidden efficiencies in terms of a business.
And then did you kind of extrapolate that thinking toward like sports teams and, you know, teams that have been together longer, coaches who have the better culture, like that similar line of thinking?
Yeah,
like,
I think certainly I value that heavily in the analysis that I do in terms of trying to predict futures and different things like that. More so on the continuity side, just in general, you see certain teams that are really good at developing players over time. And there's something to that. And it's something that we're not able to see, right? We don't know, like we don't know the strength and development coaches. We don't know the performance training coaches. And we don't know who's the best among them because we never hear about them.
Outside of what's that one shooting coach who I always hear about, who taught Kawhi how to shoot?
There's a few. The most vocal coach on Twitter is Drew Hanlon.
Yeah.
Who is just on Twitter just campaigning for Joel Embiid every single night for MVP, which is really something. I mean, you got to go to bat for your guy. But we don't know a lot about these team members generally, but we see organizations that continue to like players out earn their draft capital, and you start to think about that more when a player goes to a spot. You know, obviously it's more impactful for long-term thinking than it is for like daily fantasy and different things like that. But definitely understand that, like, you know, the old notion, bad teams stay bad. There's a reason there that a lot of people probably don't realize it's prevalent throughout the whole culture. It's not specific to like one single person or one thing.
Yeah, I feel like one like classic example of that I always think of is like how the Steelers only ever draft good wide receivers. And it's like as a Patriots fan, I just feel the opposite side of this so badly.
Like, where did they find George Pickens?
Like, why can't we take any of these guys? And it's so interesting to see, like, even as you see the coaching turnover and turnover in the rest of the roster, like, I'd be really curious to kind of know, like, I don't think anyone will ever figure out what the secret sauce is there, or maybe it's just pure luck. But I'm sure, like, in a lot of those organizations, there's almost like these old, like, stories told down of how you maintain these certain like relationships and train certain types of players and stuff.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we attribute it all to whoever's making the selections, right? Like, that's our first instinct because that's all we see and that's all we know. But what if it's, you know, what if it's a wide receiver coach that is on that team that just really gets the most out of players over and over, and if they had drafted someone else, they still would have been able to get the most out of them. And that's the stuff that you don't have, you know, insight into from sitting on the outside of an organization. And I think it's really interesting when you hear people who have worked in those organizations like speak on it.
Yeah, no, totally. And so as you're working not as a full-time sports gambler,
Yeah.
content creator. Were you even in like the early 2000s spending a lot of time on like sports stuff, or did that kind of happen later in life? Or were you just always a massive sports fan?
Always a massive sports fan. So I started my first fantasy sports league when I was in 5th grade.
I was a very early.
This was
fantasy sports player.
pre-internet fantasy, I should
Wow.
say, because I'm a little older. So it was I had notebooks, like binders. I had binders of statistics. I had binders with like I photocopied like a scoring sheet for every day of the season and would write it in. And this was baseball, so this was a disaster. I was
Fifth grade.
I was 10 years old. I had a 5-team league, and the standings were kept on a whiteboard in my childhood bedroom.
That's really funny.
And the league came to an end. The season came to an end when my family's cleaning person erased the whiteboard.
Oh no.
And that was it. That was the end.
And there was no like it's pre-iPhone. There was no picture of the whiteboard.
There was no picture of the whiteboard. So
back up the state.
the only option to go back was to literally hand calculate everything that was in the binders.
No.
And I thought about it for like a long time. And this was a league that it was with 4 other friends. And this was back when, I mean, there weren't cell phones, so it was landlines. So if you wanted to make like a transaction, right, like you had to call someone else's phone, like someone else's landline. And we had this big controversy because I was born and raised in South Florida, and I was going to a Miami Marlins game, a Florida Marlins game at the time. And right before the game, I just wanted to take who was pitching that night. I think it was Al Leiter. And so I like called my friend, and the phone line was busy. So I called another friend and like made the transaction, but it wasn't to the friend that was like the person that you're supposed to make the transaction to, right? Mm-hmm. And Al Leiter like threw a no-hitter that night. And it was like this big ordeal whether I should get the points or not.
Was that maybe your first like big dopamine rush of, hey, I found the nuts, like
probably
in the last second.
It probably was. But yeah, so I started real early with fantasy leagues, and then I was the guy who ran the bracket contests in high school, in college. I think statute of limitations is out on that. I can say that in college now.
20 years.
I don't know if the NCAA is going to come after me, but then I also played fantasy leagues. Like I played in high school. I played on this site called Sandbox. It was like the first season-long fantasy site that I had found. And it was all baseball related. I started with baseball. I don't pay attention to baseball at all anymore, which is kind of
When is the last time you cared about baseball?
The last time I cared about baseball was probably the last time the Cubs were in the playoffs, which was like 3 years ago. Was probably the last time that I cared. When I had I grew up a Cubs fan. My dad's from Chicago. I was raised a Chicago sports fan. And so when they won the World Series, like there was a big weight lifted off my shoulders. And then when I saw the Ricketts family like choose not to invest in the team heavily, like they said they were going forward, I was like, okay, what am I doing with this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I played fantasy leagues all the way through high school growing up. And then when I went to college, my dad was my tennis coach growing up. So we were really, really close. And we would co-own teams together in fantasy. And it was a great way for us to stay in touch while I was in college and have like a daily reason to be in communication. So I had been playing fantasy the whole way. And I was trying to figure out a way to make a living in fantasy while I was in finance, because I knew my passion just wasn't in finance. It was fine. The work was mildly interesting. But I've just loved fantasy sports. And so this one year I played 47 season-long fantasy baseball leagues on CBS Sportsline, which at the time I think had like 37% rake. It was just outrageous. It was like looking back, it was like one of the stupidest things that I've chosen to do. But I was like, this is the only way. Like if I win like 20 of these leagues, I can make $40,000 a year, and like that's enough for me to live. And so like this is like me trying to figure out all this stuff. And at the end of that year, my brain was so fried from like running waivers every single week, from like setting lineups every single week. And I was just like, okay, well, I'm never going to have a job in fantasy sports. It's just not going to happen.
So how far away was that from when like DraftKings and FanDuel came out? And what was the transition like from, hey, I'm grinding my
Yeah.
cock off
Yeah.
all season long and going crazy, to like, I'm now doing daily contests.
Yeah, so the transition was I was writing on the side just because I liked it for a site called Fantistics that had this awesome draft software that I used for fantasy baseball and fantasy football. I was just writing like 3 times a week player blurbs and analysis and different things like that, some larger scale strategic articles. And I had this subscriber email in, and they asked, who's the best pitcher going today? And I like responded. And then the next day they emailed in the same question. And then on the 4th day of emailing in the same question, I was like, all right, buddy, I don't understand what kind of league you're playing in that you can just like trade for the best pitcher like every single day. Like, what is going on? Something's got to come to a head. I'm not answering this question every single day the rest of the year. So like, I need to know what's going on here. And he was like, oh, I play these daily fantasy leagues. And I was like, I never heard of this. And so I did a quick Google and saw a Roto-Grinders article about this guy named Hicksville Hunk who had turned $60 into $60,000. And boy, did ego get a hold of me in that moment when I read that article. And
Hicksville?
So I immediately went to, at the time it was Draft Street, and deposited $60 and was like, well, this is going to turn into $60,000. This is how this is going to work.
How did it work?
And no, in reality, the way that it worked is I played $60 worth and I lost $60 worth. and so after doing that, a number of times, I started to realize, okay, well, like something about this process doesn't make sense that I'm doing, where I'm like playing all of the money I deposit on a single night. Like that, this probably isn't long-term sustainable. So I started to like Google articles on poker and like bankroll management, different things like that, and started to understand that a little bit while I was like learning the ins and outs of daily fantasy. And over time, I started to learn. I started to get better. Draft Street back then, they had a chat on their site, just like FanDuel did. The FanDuel chat was really something, but like the Draft Street chat was actually like fairly civil, and people would communicate. And Hicksville Hunk was in the chat. And so I would just like ask these questions, and he was kind enough to answer vaguely things that would give me an idea, which was really great. And then we ended up actually sort of having conversations just about baseball generally, and then connecting kind of on the side and working together a little bit more. And he helped me advance my process quite a bit. And then over time, I just started doing better and better. And then a couple years later, I was making more money playing daily fantasy than I was in my finance job. And my now ex-wife at the time, my fiance at the time, I think, was very supportive in me pursuing this as a career, and knew like this was something I was really passionate about. So I was doing really well playing, but I didn't realize how I thought it was very risky. I thought the income was very highly volatile and very risky. I had no idea how it was not risky and it was not volatile at the time. Mm-hmm. So my idea on smoothing out the risk was to try to start a content business around this, because I'd worked in the content business on the season-long side, and I had seen nothing on the daily fantasy side. I didn't really see anybody doing it. I saw Roto-Grinders was like a forum site, and they had a little bit of analysis.
What year was this roughly?
This was like 2012, 2013.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, that
makes
tracks.
sense. I found Roto-Grinders in late 2013 or early 2014.
Yeah, I think I started playing my junior year of college, which was 2014. Yeah. And it was like it was pretty bare bones.
Yeah, it was on Roto-Grinders.
And the people on Roto-Grinders, like everybody's just kind of trying to figure it out, right? And there were some people who were further ahead of others, and some people are willing to share. It's just like every industry that's blossoming. And so I had this idea of starting this content business because I was like, oh, that'll smooth out the income stream. Mm-hmm. And little did I know, like after having like 10 years of playing DFS at a professional level for the most part, and sports gambling and all these different things, like that was the easiest it will ever be. And I mean, I remember like people reacting to me as if I was like some genius because I was playing like a bench player when an injury hit in NBA that wasn't moving into the starting lineup, but was just like a high usage bench player, like a Lou Williams type or whatever. Yeah. People thought I was like insanely smart for this. And I was like, man, it didn't occur to me how how soft the competition was. I mean, I was playing this one person. At one point I got to the point of like controlling the lobby on Draft Street in NBA, which is an exhilarating experience.
What does controlling the lobby mean?
It means that you are in every game.
Mm-hmm.
No one can avoid you. And if they want to play a head-to-head or a 3-person contest or a 5-person, you are there. And this was kind of before GPPs were like a big thing.
Yeah.
So the GPPs, you could win like, maybe $1,000 in the night was top prize or something like that. Maybe 10,000 like for the big tournament at the end of the year or something like that. But so I was just playing cash games. I was playing one lineup. And I would play this one user named FreeDots who had a Knicks logo. And I would just play them every single night, like for thousands of dollars. And it was like exhilarating because I was just like, it's a clean sweat. It's like my lineup versus one lineup on a given night. Whereas like now daily fantasy, it's just like I've got 350 lineups. Like I've got 12% of this guy who just scored a touchdown. The field's got 9%. I guess I'm doing well. Like I have no idea. So it's very different. The whole evolution's been wild.
Do you ever do any single entry cash game stuff anymore, or is it all basically the MME?
So for NBA, I don't have the time to manage it with the content schedule of NBA. With NFL, I'm able to. And I kind of this year, midway through the season, I started playing cash. Very small stakes compared to what I was playing in tournaments, but largely just, I joked, but I was like, I need to get the good plays out of my system. I just need to
I gotta get them on a team.
I need to get them on a team so I can be like, yeah, I have that rooting interest. So, okay, now I can go fade.
Not taking Saquon.
It's just like, I don't have to deal with this. It's like, okay, if they go off, whatever, I'll have the dopamine hit of I created this lineup that's doing well.
Yeah.
Even though I'm losing tens of thousands of dollars, I'll have the little dopamine hit in my brain that will be like, like, oh, you picked the smart guys. And so yeah, I'll do that, but not at a level that's going to impact my results at the end of the year.
Yeah. No, I feel like, I trying to think back to like 2013, 2014 Roto Grinders. I knew it was soft because I was making money as a college kid.
Yeah.
Like with 6 months of experience. And I had to go through the same bankroll management lesson.
Yeah.
Because I didn't come from poker either. So there was no like, oh, I have $100. We got $100 in.
Yeah.
And then it's gone, and you're like, shit, I only have $50 next weekend. Like, what do I do? But it's something I see parallels with in the crypto space, gambling space, blossoming spaces, as you said, is there are opportunities of time where you don't realize how good it is, and you need, in my head, to just like find those opportunities and try to go as all in as possible on them, realizing like this time is not going to be this way forever.
Yeah.
Like we've seen it. I've seen it with DFS when I was making money, because by 2017 I was a losing player, and that's how I got into crypto. I didn't sell. I took my bankroll and put it into Litecoin and ETH and was like, I'm done with DFS. But I feel like that's a reoccurring theme that we see is like, if you can actually understand like, hey, this is a soft environment, to just like go all in and earn as close to all in as you can while managing your risk. But like, it seems like to me like the most plus EV decisions I've been able to make in my life have been around those times.
Yeah. And I feel like we've really seen that. Like, I don't know, there's just so many people who I've met who like were doing poker and then were doing DFS and then did crypto. And I'm like basically just going to see whatever they do next and try to copy them.
Yeah. So I think I used to always have this, I had this big fear and like insecurity around like what happens when DFS stops, which when your income is highly variable, and you make your income via like an edge that you're theoretically also eating away at by providing content and analysis and different things like that. Like you have this idea of like, okay, like I'm only going to be useful to people as long as I'm winning. And the moment I stop winning, people are going to be like, well, he's washed. He doesn't have any good analysis or whatever. He can't teach. And so I had all these insecurities and these like, just super scared of just like, this is going to go away. And I'm not like, I'm not hireable in any other industry. Cause like, who the hell's going to be like, yeah, okay, you were professionally gambling for the last decade. Like, yeah, I'd love to hire you. Like, so I was just like, I used to have all these insecurities about it. And then the pandemic hit and NFT world hit. And I was just like watching all of my friends make money in very strange ways. And I was just like, oh, I guess this is just how I'm going to do this the rest of my life.
Yeah.
like
That's just what life is.
Okay, I'm just going to find weird ways to make money. And I just got to come to acceptance that like, there's going to be another weird thing for me to figure out and make money on down the road. And that's been pretty life-changing, even though like I think my crypto investing has largely been poor. The knowledge it's given me to like understand like, okay, there's going to be other soft markets down the road. And I happen to be exposed to a bunch of people who are naturally inclined to find them. And so I'm naturally going to learn about them over time. It's not like I'm going to hear, at Thanksgiving from, my hip nephew about like some new space. I'm probably going to have people that have had like some exposure to it because they're actively seeking out these types of opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of the things that was really funny to me because like I've been in crypto for longer than most of the DFS people have. But I was also playing DFS. I've been playing since 2014. And like I remember back then there was really not a lot of free content online and I was broken in college. I was playing like literally $5 a night. I would do like one $5 single entry for NBA a night. And like me and my roommate would come up with a team and like we were just barely winning, but basically just treading water. And I would read Josh Engelman's stuff on Reddit every day. He would come and post analysis and like I would watch all of his stuff and now it's come full circle to where like I've just been DMing him about like NFTs sometimes. And it's just like this really weird thing where like you guys and all the Awesemo guys and stuff, I just like now have these weird interactions with where for a very long time you were all just like fake internet people who provided me daily fantasy sports content.
Yeah, it's such a mindfuck for me too because it's like you, Peter, Levitan, like people I just was watching in my dorm or in my apartment in college who you guys had no idea who the fuck we were. Now are like coming into Punk's Discord and being like, why is a hoodie special? I'm like, what is going on? Like all the smart people that I took advice on and made me money are now coming to me for advice. Like this is a crazy mindfuck. But it's been, one of the most serendipitous things that's ever happened in my life. Because now I've got to, basically get into the circle of people who I've looked up to for years. And it's because of what I did in a space that isn't related to what I looked up to them in, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And so as the space is growing in like 2012, 2013, 2014, how were you kind of getting connected to different people and like how did you eventually meet Levitan and Jennings and all of those guys? Was it just like forums and like live events or?
Yeah, live events. So that was the big thing. So it was interesting that Peter Jennings in particular, he was playing a lot on FanDuel at the time, and I had only played on Draft Street. I just like learned how to like Draft Street was just such an incredible site because especially for basketball, you would get penalized for missing shots. So you would like lose a quarter of a point for every missed field goal and half a point for a missed free throw and stuff. So I love efficient basketball. Like if you follow me on Twitter, you'll notice like all the players that I love are guys that are like D'Anthony Melton, Evan Mobley, like guys who just play the game like in an efficient way and don't take bad shots. And like the guys that like kind of drive me nuts at times are guys that are like a little bit more inefficient chuckers who I feel like don't understand their role as well. And like Draft Street like penalized those guys. So it was like beautiful. I would just like keep fading Carmelo Anthony every single night, just making money. It was just amazing. But so Pete was like dominating FanDuel and I like didn't even know who he was. And then he won some FanDuel live final that again, I didn't even know this was all going on FanDuel. I just knew of Draft Street at the time. And he won some FanDuel live final that got some attention. I was like, oh, there's another site to play and whatnot. And then I ended up meeting him and Al Zeidenfeld. Al Zeidenfeld was the first person I met in DFS at a live final in Vegas for Draft Street football. There were like, I think 20 live finalists at the time. I think first place might've been $50,000 or something like that. And Al was the first person who came up to me at this like, meet up, initial get drinks, kind of happy hour type thing. And we chatted for a while and he was just really personable guy. He was really nice and really kind. And then, you just start meeting other people. And the great thing about this is, it's a very isolating thing to play DFS. For most people, they're doing it by themselves. And so to have people who understand kind of the nuances of it, it was easy to make conversations with people. And then you just sort of stayed in touch over time. And so I was introduced to Pete and then Pete is the mayor of any setting that he walks into. He's just constantly introducing people left and right.
God bless.
One of the nicest people I've ever met, and he just has connected me to so many great people. So over time, that's how I met Adam Levitan and Andrew Wiggins. Andrew Wiggins I used to compete against a lot in the NBA streets on the draft street side. And so you just kind of learn that you're competing against these people, and you meet them through live events and different things like that. And, you just know everybody by a handle, which is weird. But yeah, that's mostly live events was how I mostly met.
And I feel like for the most part, it's a pretty welcoming group. Every once in a while you get like some cocky guys on Twitter who like to talk shit. But I feel like for the most part, it's a group who's like super, even if it's someone who you've been sweating against for a long time, it's more like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm putting a face to a name as opposed to like, hey, fuck you, you beat me in this tournament or whatever.
Yeah, there's definitely the benefit of just shared experiences and understanding kind of the ups and downs of things. There's a lot of ego in the industry. I think any industry that's dominated by, men in their early 20s is going to have a lot of ego, and that's influenced a lot of people that have come and gone in the space that I think have been exceptional DFS players, but ego kind of got the best of them. And so that's always going to be a component of just kind of the nature of the industry in terms of the community that it's serving. But in general, I agree. It's a pretty welcoming community. It's interesting. Because as we're expanding into like sports betting and different things like that, it's interesting how different communities are protective of edges and less protective of edges. And I think because daily fantasy was spurned out of people that had played season-long fantasy leagues, and season-long fantasy leagues are so communal in terms of like you're playing with friends, or you're competing against each other, but it's kind of like to give each other shit. It's not necessarily to make money. You had a lot of people playing daily fantasy who really wanted to learn from one another and wanted to try to figure out who could help teach them. And there's a lot of other spaces that are not as welcoming of that, because I think the background is not as much that. It's like you're competing against, in sports betting, you're competing against a book, right? And so there's something that if you figure out, you're not trying to let go of what that information is. And so it's very interesting how the daily fantasy sports community kind of blossomed out of nothing into an environment that was a little bit more communal in terms of trying to help people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And were you doing sports gambling stuff as well at the time, or were you just all in daily fantasy?
No, so I didn't do any sports gambling stuff. Any of the modeling that I'd done back then, which was very elementary, and largely helped by Mike Leone, who I had met through the season-long fantasy site that we were writing at together. It was all based on the assumption that the lines that were set by the market were correct. So I wasn't trying to beat those lines. So I had never built anything that was trying to beat those lines. It was just trying to assume that information is correct, and like I can figure out how the pie is divvied up better than everybody else. And so that has been kind of the basis for much of stuff. And then over time, as sports betting has gotten legalized and different things, the prop market has been something that has more directly coincided with the work that I do. And it's easier for me to be like, okay, this is what I'm doing, player projection stuff and divvying up the pie. I can do that effectively. Now it's just like modeling the distributions on results and stuff.
Something that I never really have taken action on, but feel like it has to be true, is that the prop market is just like way less efficient than like the regular sports gambling market. And that if you really wanted to spend the time and like dig in, that there is like very serious money to be made playing props.
Serious money in gambling in less liquid markets, like a props market, or like, let's say if you were like betting like WNBA sides or totals or different things
you were
like that.
crushing WNBA underdog.
WNBA DFS and was a good thing for me for a period of time. Then the liquidity dried up. But it's
like a shit coin.
Yeah. I need more people to play WNBA DFS. We need to get the prize pools back up again. But the prop side, so beating the props market, it's getting harder and harder. I mean, the books are getting sharper and sharper as there's more services like us that are trying to attack them. But just kind of modeling player performance and competing against lines is not super difficult. The challenge is always like trying to figure out how to get money down on these things.
Because you have pretty intense limits on.
You will get limited very, very quickly on props if you're a winning props better. And so, that then it becomes like a game of like getting accounts and different things like that, which is just not my expertise in any way, shape, or form, because I didn't come up through the sports gambling side of things. I came up through the DFS side of things. So it's very interesting as I've learned over the last few years as we've tried to develop this product and get into the betting space a little bit more, interacting with people who have come up through that grind, and they see the world very differently than the way that I see the world. So it's really interesting trying to serve a market that is not, it has a percentage of the user base that you're serving that you don't have the same background and kind of understanding of the landscape that they do.
What are some of the things that you think are drastically different between the two?
I think the biggest thing is just in general, a lot of the sports betting community is built around the idea of like, it's you versus the book, and then there's you versus everyone else who's trying to beat the book. And so it's very you centric, and your results are directly the result of your work each and every day. Whereas in the DFS space, I think there's more people who interact in DFS in more of a communal aspect, whether it's the forums that they were on or whatever. It's more of an us versus everyone else instead of a me versus everyone else.
That's interesting to me too, because just like a base level perception of the two, I would think you would get more squad wins if we all think this line is like a no-brainer and we all smash it and we all win together. That's like at the craps table, we all win.
Yep.
Whereas DFS, if you win the Wellymaker, I didn't win it.
Yeah. No,
so that's
I know.
Weird. Like,
I know. It's
kind of
and maybe it's my biased experience from coming up in one area and viewing it through the lens of more communal than it actually is. But it feels to me like people that come up through the DFS space or have come up through that space because they've been exposed to more people sharing information and sharing knowledge. They're more open to that idea. And people who have come up through the sports betting space are a little bit more protective of that idea. They're also, there's a lot more, I don't know, it seems like there's a lot more negativity in that space. Now, look, there's plenty of negativity in any of these spaces because, you put yourself out there and you're in a business where you're making predictions on a daily basis, and more than 80% of the people who play DFS are going to be losers long term. Yeah. So like it's a really difficult market to try to serve. I've joked about this a lot as I've like gotten deeper into therapy, but the idea of like being a people pleaser, which I am, and trying to work in an industry where only 15% of the people are happy is just like a totally insane decision that I've made with my life.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that. Very similar over here. It's like, I don't know how many percent of NFT traders make profit, but it has to be under 20%.
All our friends are broke.
You're trying to make everyone happy, and you're like, at the end of the day, making yourself the most unhappy because you're trying to make everyone else happy.
Yeah, it's a difficult life decision that I've made, but I feel that way with the sports betting side. I feel more critique and pressure around the ways that we go about our business, more judgment, and I get it because we're newer in this space, so some of it is definitely on solid ground in terms of the critiques, but there's a level of skepticism that comes in that space with anybody who puts out any work. And there's some of that in the DFS space, certainly. But I think because the DFS space it's more public in terms of your results and different things like that, I think it was a little bit easier to earn credibility than it has been in the sports betting space.
It's funny you say that because like, in the blockchain world, everything is really on chain, and I've earned a lot of credibility just by my actions that are provable and mine. There's no like, oh, well, I had this slip, but I like faked a picture of a 50K bet that I didn't win.
Right.
Yeah. Like it's all on chain. So I think that there's something to, oh, this is out and open. This is like a proof of work or proof of success that just gives a lot more credibility to it.
Yeah, and it's like if you're putting out a bunch of NBA projections and stuff, and then I look at your entries on FanDuel and you've got totally opposite of those projections. Yeah. It like doesn't take very long to be like, I'm not sure he's selling me the real deal here.
And thank God for the sites that have built tools that like look at like that give like portfolio exposure and stuff, because I will tell you, anytime I have a lineup that gets near the top of a contest, and I'm playing hundreds of lineups, right? And it has one player in the lineup that I talked like, oh, I'll have less of them than the field or whatever it is. Like I will get like 6 DMs on this, like almost every time about like, you said to fade this guy. And I'm like,
the field is going to have him at a 10% clip, and I want him at 6%.
It's just, and so like this happened to be the lineup. Like I didn't know this lineup was going to win. Like, and I like earlier this year in NFL, I like flag planted AJ Brown one week, and I had a lineup that did really well with Devontae Smith, and they're like, "Oh, why would you go directly against your advice?" And I was like,
because it's football.
I was like, I played like more AJ Brown than Devontae Smith, but the whole premise was I thought the Eagles were going to score a lot through the passing game, and so like I just want to get exposure to everything. And this one just happened. I don't know.
I can't believe you took Dallas Goedert on that.
I feel like that just represents like those types of people have such a fundamental misunderstanding of how daily fantasy sports work.
I'm just like, I didn't know this lineup was going to win. Like
it's like basically what you're saying is like, I think this guy has like a 5% better chance than the field is giving him, and this guy has a 5% worse chance. And people take that and they're like, all right, I'm playing 100% and 0% the other.
Yeah, it's the expectation that you actually like, you know, have Biff's almanac, that you actually like know what the future is going to be is challenging to deal with. And so I spent a lot of time in my years working in the DFS space, in Discords, in Slacks, in like trying to educate the customer base, and that has been a real mental grind.
I'm sure,
because you just get so much negative feedback from people who are struggling, and I get it. I wish I could create, like I look at I'm a huge fan of the Dan Levitan show, and I watch their work, and I'm sure that the work is extremely stressful and extremely difficult. But I see that they create all this content, and then they have all these people who just love the content, and that's it, and they're happy. And I think about like all this content that I create, and how many people are mad at the content that I create because it didn't translate directly into results for them purposely. And I'm like, I chose the wrong path here, based on like trying to be the people pleaser.
I feel like there's probably, like, this is any industry, like where you're a people pleaser, but you get a brunt of the negative feedback and you don't get the successful feedback. Like, hey man, that call on whoever, you know, I went pretty hard on them and did well. Like, I feel like those have to feel better when you do get them, but like, what would you say is the ratio, like 10-1?
So it's interesting. It's so the ratio of what it actually is versus how my brain interprets it is wildly different.
Really? Yeah.
So the ratio of what it is, I get a lot of positive feedback. Thankfully, I would say the ratio is probably like 60-40 negative in terms of overall, but how my brain interprets it is 95-5 in terms of negative versus positive. Like I will have we'll have like a really good night with our recommendations and our projections and stuff, and you'll see the Discord, like everybody's happy, or the prop bets we put out there or whatever, and then there'll be like one comment that will just like string a nerve. I'll just be like, God, I guess I did get that wrong, or whatever, like that, whatever it is. And so, you know, it's a constant process to try to reteach my brain to like process the information better. But just I will tend to harp on, you know, what I did that let somebody down as opposed to what I did that helped somebody. Thankfully, I've been in the space a long enough time now that, like, early on it was a lot more negative then, because people are really skeptical of whether you can help them or not. And then there's people who I have the benefit of having done this for 10 years now, and so I have people who have followed my work for 10 years. And those people end up being super positive and super supportive, and they create an atmosphere around Discords and communities and different things that help. And so, like, the more time you get into this and the more you like weed out the people who are just never going to like you for whatever it is, unless they, you know, bing something, the easier it gets. But it's a constant struggle to try to like retrain your brain to process the positive feedback appropriately compared to the negative feedback.
I have a hard time doing that in our field too.
Oh yeah.
I will take one negative comment worse than like 10 good comments.
Exactly.
Like
it's just human nature.
No. Especially when you're a people pleaser. You want everyone to be happy.
Exactly.
Like, you're putting in a ton of work into a product that you want people to enjoy. And obviously when 80% of the people probably are going to lose anyway.
Yeah.
Like a tough battle to win.
Yeah, it's tough. And the DFS industry, unfortunately, like the way that it has been marketed, right, is like you can make life-changing money. And I get it. That's what brings people in the door. But this is where I spend like so much time in Discords and Slacks and communities trying to educate people Like, this really should be entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you enjoy playing the games and you enjoy connecting with sports, and like Andy, you were talking about like making lamps with your college roommate and whatnot, like that's what this all should be.
Yeah.
Like that's what this whole industry was built on in terms of fantasy sports originally. And so, but like screenshot marketing was really effective. It's really frustrating how effective it is, but it's very effective. My first business almost went out of business because I refused to do screenshot marketing.
When you say screenshot marketing, does that mean like showing your ROI or
showing no,
like,
not showing
winnings?
your ROI. God no, just showing one night that you won.
Okay, yeah. That's what I meant. Like one. Like,
no, like long-term stuff.
Yeah.
No, like
I love that about
yeah.
Levitan because he will post, "This is my head-to-head
Yep.
ROI for the whole season."
Yep,
And he's like a complete transparent book with it.
we try to do stuff like that, and especially in the tournament side of things, we try to educate what's like realistic expectations and whatnot. But I mean, back when everybody was trying to build a business around this stuff, people would just like screenshot a GPP win, and like they'd have one lineup that won, like $10,000 or whatever, but they had but you see them play and you know that this is their first screenshot in like 6 months, and, and you have a good feel for who's doing well and who's not, and it was a really effective marketing tactic. And I remember I refused to do it. I was just like, this is not a way to set expectations for people. And we were on the verge of going out of business. We weren't making any money because I just couldn't get any subscribers with just trying to like word of mouth and like normal marketing and stuff like that. So it's challenging. A lot of the people come into the space with the expectation that you're going to make a ton of money and it's going to be life-changing money and I'm going to win $1 million and all these different things, because the person who won $1 million is now teaching me and like I'm going to learn all their secrets. And the reality of it is like there's a ton of luck that goes involved in terms of like when you land on the right lineup, if it's in the right contest, and how much the payout structure is and all these different things. And what people should be doing is they should be having fun, and this should be like, instead of going to the movies, I'm going to play a DFS lineup this week, and that's how I wanted the community to be marketed, and it just got really ahead of itself in terms of the amount of money that could be made in the space. And it has, I think it will eventually go back to that. But we'll see.
It's funny. Speaking of the like right lineup, right time thing, I had that happen once. I think I was like sitting in his basement actually, and we were playing
Cash
a lot of
lineup
DFS
and
together.
no tournaments. It's
And
nuts.
I was in because I was a small player on FanDuel, and so I was in one of like the like rookies only or whatever they advertised it as leagues, and it was like a $1 single entry.
Yeah.
And it was like a 2-game night. And so, there weren't a lot of teams.
Yeah.
And I just I ended up winning that tournament for like a couple $100.
Yep.
And I went and checked like what the biggest tournament of the night was, and I would have won the biggest
Oh,
tournament
no.
of the night with that
The
lineup.
worst.
Never check.
And I was
check.
just like, yeah, wish I had more money to actually.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone has that one time where they
Yeah.
enter a lineup into either a head-to-head or a cash game or like a 10-man or something small, and then it was the nuts, and then they forever were like, okay, I'm always entering this in at least a $10 GPP.
Chasing the ghost.
But it never wins again.
No,
It's
it's not the way to
you
play.
can't get lightning in a
Yeah.
bottle twice.
Yeah, it's not the way to play. But yeah, no, I think everybody has that experience of, there's so much variance in the very top end results of these things. I've talked about this before, but I look at, so to analyze like my play, I look at what percentage of my lineups are getting into the top 1%, top 0.1%, top 0.5%, because that's really where you make money.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can generate like 1.5+% of my lineups in the top 1%, then I'm generating edge over the field. And so I will do this over periods of time, and I can take like 3 different pictures of 3 different periods of time, and they will look exactly the same. And the ROI in one could be plus 30%. The next one could be minus 20%. Next one could be like 3%. And like, it's just totally random on whether I finish third or first in terms of how like I make money at the end of the year. And it's super highly variant and can be very misleading in terms of how well or how poorly you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's the real challenging thing about DFS, is like trying to understand, like, am I good? am I good? Am I lucky? Am I bad? Am I unlucky? Like, trying to figure out between those 4 boxes is real hard.
Yeah, and you have to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
You can't be like, oh, I'm good.
Yeah.
and you're just running hot.
Yeah.
And you're not really, your process is shit, but you're just lucky.
Yeah.
Do you have any particularly bad beats that you remember where you were like, one drop touchdown away from a first or something that was bad?
I'm sure there's more. Last night I would have won showdown if it was Kate Otten and not Cameron Brate. So when the touchdown happened, I thought it was Otten, and I was like, oh yes, I'm rich. And then I saw 84, and I was like, oh, that's not Kate Otten. I'm not rich. But I think the one that stands out most to me was just this one night in NBA. This was back when I was playing a lot of cash games, playing a lot against Condia. At this point in time, shout out to Condia. And it was like a 5-game slate, and through the first 3 or 4 games, I had like the absolute nuts in like my main lineup, and like my MME exposures were like all way. I was just going to sweep the entire slate. And there was a game in Mexico City with the Spurs and somebody else, and there was an elevator fire that ended up canceling the game. And I just sat there as the news was happening and seeing like the images on Twitter of like smoke filling in this arena. And I was just like, it's like, I've never seen an NBA game get canceled. Like, they're not going to cancel the NBA game. Like, they got an elevator. They got to be able to figure this out,
fire
right?
Extinguisher in there.
Like, they got to be able to figure this out. And then I'm just like, hours go by, and I'm like, this probably isn't happening. And so that one still irks me, because I think I was at a point where I had been getting my ass kicked by Condia for a couple weeks, and I think I had him real good, and I had 3 players from that game, and he had none. And so he ended up like, he had like a bad lineup that night and ended up like sweeping the slate. And I was so mad because like everybody was playing guys from this game except him. And I was just like, so
Sounds
mad.
like a very familiar situation of what happened over the last couple of weeks. I mean, luckily everything turned out well in this situation.
Yeah.
But it was another, like, I've never seen a football game just canceled.
Yeah, it was totally crazy. And like, I mean, obviously this is less important for most people in the world, but the fact that it was the last game of the best ball season.
We were in July, like, fuck, that Cincy Buffalo game. Like, I almost bought tickets to go. It's like an hour and a half away. I'm like, this is going to be the game of the year. Yeah. And then we're all just like, the most horrifying thing we've seen. And then thank God he's good and everything is good. But it's like, you don't know when you're projecting, like, oh, what about the elevator?
I have no idea.
Like, can we get the technician to check the elevator in Mexico City? I might need to
just stuff that is totally out of your hands.
That's how I have the best models, because I account for elevator fires.
Exactly.
I have the strength and conditioning coaches on speed dial, and I also have the elevator technician. So I have 2 layers of extra.
So they gave those players 0?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was straight zeros.
Yeah.
So I had like the nuts and then 3 zeros in my lineup, and I had more players from that game than everybody else in all my contests. So I ended up like having like a negative like 85% return. I mean, I was good enough to win like 10% back of my entry fees while playing with like 2 less players than everybody else. So I was just like, it was soul crushing.
That's tough
that night. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had too many bad ones. I had my first. I really want to win first in an underdog tournament, just because that's like all I play now, because now I'm very casual when I play, and so it's the most fun. But I had a few weeks ago, and at this point I guess it was like midway through the season, because McCaffrey was still on the Panthers. There was a game, I think they were playing the Bucks, and McCaffrey had like a 60-yard reception down to like the 3-yard line, and if he had scored that, I would have won. And then PJ Washington, or not PJ
Walker.
PJ Walker threw a pick on like the next play.
Yeah.
And I'm at the bar with like a couple of my friends and my fiance, and they didn't have that game on the TVs. And so I'm just sitting there refreshing my phone.
You did the super alert that goes off.
Yeah, they just, because they didn't have like NFL Sunday tickets, so it was just like a Chiefs game on or something. And I'm like, oh my God, fuck.
Nothing worse.
Yeah, but that's what makes it fun though. And like, I think fortunately for me, it's enough of a casual thing where it's like, fuck, give me a shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, I'm over it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But how have you, over the years, like, I know DFS has changed so much over the last like 10 years. Are there any particular like moments in time or things where you're like, all right, I need to change my process around this, or I need to update what I'm doing because this is happening now?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that happened over time. So when I first was playing DFS, I was a one lineup guy. I would play one lineup across like all the contests, and that was my sweat for the night. And grinded cash games, 3-man tournaments, 5-man, so on and so forth. And over time, I just sort of realized like every tournaments were coming up, and people were winning money with things that made no sense to me, like literally no sense. I remember I did some content work for DraftKings. DraftKings had this thing called the DraftKings Pro program. It was like me, Peter Jennings, Al Zeidenfeld, Bales, David Kitchen. And we were like doing some content, some Sunday night sweat shows and different things like that. And I remember they had me doing like the analysis of like an MLB live final. And I was interviewing Jay Rayner, Beat by Majip, who's like one of the best game theory, like, I guess he's like a board game specialist as well. He's like, he didn't watch sports. And I like the legend of this guy who like didn't watch sports and just like played these games from game theory perspective was so interesting to me. And I just didn't get it. And I remember interviewing him and him telling me, oh, well, like I'll know right after lock, if I played well or not. And I like had no concept of what this meant. Yeah. Like I was just like, what do you mean? You'll know right at lock. Yeah, exactly. And he's like, oh, well, like I'll know exactly at lock whether I've played well or not, because I'll know if I read what my opponents are going to do correctly or not. And I was just like, what?
You're not protecting the game.
No, you just have to get the most points. Like I didn't, I didn't understand at all. And it was one of those moments where I felt really dumb. And I realized, okay, like this is like the evolution of the game is something that I haven't put any time into understanding. I put so much time into trying to figure out how to project players correctly and how to make one lineup and how to have that lineup be higher probability of scoring points than other people. I had not put real time into understanding the game theory aspects of playing tournaments. And so it was kind of like a switch went off where I was like, okay, this is probably the future of this. Like I'm at the point where I'm grinding out like a 7% ROI in cash games. And like, how much money do I really want to put down? How much money each night is going to be an uncomfortable amount of money to get to that point. And so to get to a point where I'm making good money when you're looking for a 7% ROI. And so I just realized like I needed to change, and I worked really hard at becoming a tournament player. And it's really interesting. I think it's so funny now because most people have gotten into DFS in the last few years or have seen my work at Establish the Run. I'm pretty much known on the football side, because the only content I do is tournament based, as like the tournament guy. Yeah. And for me, it is just so funny because if you had, gone back in time to the early days of DFS, literally no one would consider me to be a tournament oriented player. Like everybody would have been like, you're taking tournament advice from this guy? Like he doesn't know what the hell he's doing in tournaments.
Well, now you have the proof on chain to back up like, hey, I know what the fuck I'm doing in tournaments. Like, I mean, I was looking at your Roto Grinders leaderboard today just to like refresh my brain. I was like, damn, like you've made that many live finals, and I don't even know if they update it still. Like it's maybe a little deprecated.
I don't know.
Like,
I don't know. I haven't chased live finals in a long time, so I don't know if they're still updating that stuff. But yeah, DFS has been really, really good to me, and there's been a lot that's come from it, both financially and just like professionally, and growing and learning and working with cool people. But it's been wild, and the tournament stuff, like just adjusting to getting good at that was really challenging, which is really cool. Like I don't know. I don't understand. So my fiance works in investment banking, and she has like all these different like challenges of like corporate world and different things like that. And it's interesting to me because like the things that are challenges to me, I get to see results on almost immediately. And the things that are challenging to most other people in the real world, like that are professional challenges or things that they're working on, like take so much time to figure out if you're advancing or not on it. And that's good and bad. Like the immediate feedback each and every day of how you're doing is challenging to the brain. But it's also super useful in terms of like, okay, this was like a professional challenge I had, and like I tackled it, which is not the way I think of it. I was just like, oh, I was trying to figure out this game. Yeah. But like in reality, that's like my version of a professional challenge to
So you went pretty quickly from like transitioning from cash to like winning the Wellymaker, right? Like when?
Yeah, so I was still playing some cash games at the time. I won the Wellymaker in 2014. And I was still playing some cash games at that time, but that was back. I mean, I had not used an optimizer.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did
Yeah.
optimizers
Yeah.
exist at that
I had
point?
not used. I don't know if they
Were you
did.
hand built like
I
150
hand
lineups?
built. So in that contest, I hand built. I meant to hand build 50,
Mm-hmm.
and I hand builded 50, but I didn't enter one lineup. And it's actually funny. At like 4:30 of that day, it was a lineup that was my best lineup, and I was looking for it, and I was like, "It's not in the Wellymaker."
Really?
I cost myself $1 million. Like this lineup.
Like, are you looking out on DraftKings and
I,
the blog?
yeah, it's
where
like
you
in
see the
there.
lineup?
It's in there, and it's in some other contest. And I'm like, how did I not get it in this other contest? There weren't like CSV edits. Like it was just,
Yeah.
it was a
And
disaster.
so were you just making 50 lineups on like Excel basically? Or
No, not even.
You were just
In the
clicking in.
DraftKings
Just,
editor.
In the draft things, just editing. Yeah, just editing.
I don't even think the UI has changed much since you were probably
It has
doing that
not.
either. Like it's
It
the
is
same.
not.
fucking
It's
UI.
it's pretty similar. But yeah, so I'd hand built 50 lineups, and I'd start on like Friday night, and then just build them. And if news came, like you just do the best you can with what you have. But yeah, at that point, I was still playing cash games quite a bit. And then I remember, because after I won the Wellymaker, I remember having a conversation with Peter Jennings, who has a much greater risk tolerance than me, and was playing a lot more on a given night than me. And and he's like, "How much do you play on a given night?" He's like, because he was like, Pete's the nicest guy in the world, so I should have maybe considered the source. But he was like, "You're the best NBA DFS player in the world." And at the time, I was like, "Of course I'm the best NBA DFS player in the world." Pete's telling me I'm the best. Pete could have just been really nice at the time to me. I don't know. But he's like, "I really think you should be pushing your edges more in NBA." He's like, "How much are you playing on a night?" And I was like, "Oh, probably like $5,000 to $10,000 a night, something like that." And he's like, "Oh, that's not nearly enough for what you should be playing." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I remember I was playing cash games, so I just started loading up, and I had like for the next. This was sometime in like February. I had this conversation, and I put in like $50,000 on a given night, and I remember at lock the anxiety that hit, and I was like, I don't think I could do this. You're like, fuck. It's like, I don't, this isn't good.
That's a car.
Like, I don't think I could do this.
Heart rate's
And
at
so
100
like, so I was like, okay, maybe. And I think I ended up losing small that night. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to try this again. And then the next night, I think I won decently. And then I tried a third night, and I think I like lost. And at the third night, I was like, I don't think I don't think my body can sustain like the amount of anxiety that I'm feeling at lock. So I was like, okay, I'm going back down to my normal like 5 to 10K. I feel a little bit more comfortable at that range. But yeah, I was still playing cash games back then. And then I think I transitioned off of cash games. I think it was like 2015, where I was like, I started to realize that the games were becoming more difficult to the point that it was very hard for me to be able to effectively do both, and that I was sort of splitting some of my mental capacity between cash and tournaments, and I really needed to invest kind of all in one direction if I was going to do it well.
And then ever since then, it's just been.
Since then, it's been pretty much straight tournaments, except for the cash game plays that I need to get out of my system.
Yeah, just
for the like
let it out.
$1,000 of head to heads, where I'll post like $7,000 of head to heads, and then I'll look Sunday morning like 10 minutes before lock, and I'll have like $400 picked up, and I'll be like, okay, cancel. But I got the good plays out of my system, so I can win my $400 while losing my $10,000 in tournaments.
Yeah, and so would you say like the two biggest kind of like more like tech changes for DFS over the years were like optimizers becoming a thing, and then like at like real ownership projections and like taking those seriously?
Yeah. So if you play DFS now and you didn't play DFS before optimizers were a thing, it would be so funny to like be able to transport people to that time, because when these things were happening, there were a lot of things that were happening. Like people were scripting how to pick up head-to-heads and different things, and like hunt the lobby.
There's a Roto Grinders extension that I used. that would mark things as green.
Yeah.
And I would only ever take green head-to-heads.
Yep.
I would never take red, never yellow. It was only green.
So that was allowed, right? But there were people who were doing like an actual script that was just
automatically
automating it.
It
right?
was competitive.
So like you would post something in the lobby and it would be gone instantly if you weren't a good player, right? And so the sites ended up like having to like figure out, how to adjust this and make rules. But this was around the time that like optimizers were starting to become a thing as well. And so there was this like man versus machine like argument going on in the DFS spape about like, which is so funny because DFS had been around for like less than 10 years and people were like, well, this isn't the way it was meant to be.
God intended. There would be no optimizers.
So it's really funny to think back about how there was this big divide at the time. And I was sort of on the side of like, I didn't understand the technology and I didn't understand how to use optimizers. And I was sort of on the side of like, yeah, I don't want these things in the game. And now like I rely on them for like everything that I do. So it's really interesting, but it's also like I think there's with all things with technology, when there's a lack of understanding and something is new, people only see their worst fears in whatever it is. They don't see what I thought, okay, like these machines are just creating lineups that are so much better than anything I can do. Like, how am I going to compete with this? And then you learn how to use an optimizer and you realize like there's a lot of ways to make really bad lineups with this thing.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
And
You're telling me I shouldn't
stacks.
have 99%
yeah,
with the Doncic
and people don't understand that. People think it's like a slot machine. You just hit the button and it spits out the winners and you collect your prizes. Like that's what people think of optimizers, and it's just crazy.
Yeah. And yeah, I think we were talking about this before everything started, but I think that's before we started recording, I should say. And that's one of the things that's been really interesting about Underdog. And I've been thinking about a lot is like just how you kind of brought me back to like you can't have an optimizer for this. And you like, especially with NBA, can't really max enter on any given night. It's essentially impossible.
Yeah.
And if you are doing it, you're starting drafts right when the morning starts and you're ripping multiple drafts at a time. And it's definitely not the most plus EV way to be playing basketball. And so I'm really curious to see kind of how that evolution happens with Underdog as well. Like I know that there was for the NFL best ball this past year, there were like some like Chrome plugins and stuff that would tell you, tell you your exposure and tell you kind of the week 17 matchups and stuff. And like, I could definitely extrapolate that to plugins that are drafting for you and where you just like set your max exposures and say you want this many stacks and kind of letting it all go. But it sounds way more complicated than just spitting out 150 lineups.
Yeah, it is super complicated stuff that we've thought about a little bit as well. And it's stuff that ultimately, like, even if you can create that stuff, it'll be on the site to determine whether they allow that stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Like, whether they believe it's better for the integrity of the games or not. And then the sites will have, real challenges on like how to make decisions around that stuff because the technology fuels more entries. It fuels more earnings for them. It fuels bigger contests. It fuels more notoriety, but it also comes with an element that some of their users might not want.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been interesting. Like, even like the projections and stuff, like I've been following the ETR NFL projections for Underdog. And I was like the main person bugging Levitan on Twitter for those.
Add
for a
the
long
thing.
time.
I'm over here
please.
manually. Like I forget what I was doing. I think I was like looking at a mixture of Thorman's rankings and just like the normal projections. And then I was making my own list.
That's the grind.
That way. And I was like, all right, these are my tiers and I'm ready. But like once it was added, it was so much easier.
Well, that was like one of the things that's interesting with that is like the idea of kind of the positional scarcity that comes with like the Underdog NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something I noticed like right when Underdog came out. I was just taking Travis Kelce in like week one, first round every single time. I was just like, give me Travis Kelce. Like the next best tight end is not nearly as good. Yeah. And like very quickly after like 2 weeks, that edge was gone from when I was playing. But it's definitely been interesting. It's been fun to kind of like see everyone learning again.
Yep. Best ball is addicting. So this was my first year really caring about best ball. We talked about this earlier and ripping Best Ball Mania 3 and Resurrections, now Gauntlets. But I'm addicted to best ball. Like I want to, theoretically, if I was contributing 20% of my NFL entertainment bankroll budget to best ball, I want it to be close to like 50% this year. I'm also really biased because I got a top 50 finish in Best Ball Mania 3. So now I'm like kind of hooked. Like I had Danny Jones, I had Mike Evans, and now I'm like, I
Yeah.
also had 4 wide receivers who I knew were going to put up a 0 going into the week, which was horrible.
best
But like,
ball.
I'm hooked.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, I don't really want to do the weekly grind as much because I can just sit down, do the best balls, and sit back all year, and it's a lot less like weekly stress.
Yeah.
And one thing I'm curious is, like, we were talking about gauntlets. What is your process for drafting? Like, are you a single draft, one at a time guy? Or are you doing 2, 3 in a row?
So
2, 3 at once.
yeah, for Best Ball Mania, for this seasonal stuff, I could probably I would go on like long walks essentially in the summer around New York, which is just great, and I would do 2 drafts at a time.
Underdog Cardio Club. Let's go.
Exactly.
2 drafts at a time on the phone.
On the phone, 2
Okay,
drafts at a
that's-
time on the phone, just like switching between them, and I could do that fairly comfortably. And then if I was at my desk, I could do 3 or 4 at a time if I really wanted to push it. And towards the end of the season, I was between DraftKings and Underdog trying to fill. The gauntlet, the playoff stuff is much more complex, and trying to draft multiple teams at a time is really hard to remember like how I'm building this team and like where
on
I have
the
my
phone,
exposure
it's
on the
really
phone.
hard because you don't
Yeah.
see the team.
Yeah. So the max I can do at a time is 2
Yeah.
without like really screwing up teams at the end. And or like I'd get to the final. I tried to do 3, and like one of them I'd look at the final team and I'm like, I don't have a 5-man Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Like, I'm now drafting like, I don't know, like Quez Watkins or something like that. And it's just like, okay, well, this team's
Is
probably,
Gainwell up?
probably
Like,
dead.
fucking
So yeah. But yeah, I could get up to like 3 or 4 pretty comfortably. On I saw Levitan doing like 10 at once for a stream, which I was like, okay.
No.
And these guys just give me so much crap, Levitan especially, because he's just too rich. And he's like, what is the EV that you're spending on? Like, what's your hourly rate on this stuff? And I was like, I'm not thinking
think
about this.
about that,
Yeah, like I'm just enjoying myself, man.
Yeah, it's fun.
And so then this guy goes out and like bings some $50,000 DraftKings best ball thing this year. And meanwhile, I drafted like 500 teams across. I made like a 1.5% ROI, and like just all of the taunting all season long, just like him just baking 50K. I was just like, come on, man. Like this is just like, and I was like, well, at least you got your ROI for the hours you put in.
Next year's our year.
Next year is our year. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm really curious. I feel, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts, that there's some version of like NBA best ball that's really fun, because like I really don't like NBA season long, just because I don't have the attention span or like ability to update my lineups every day. And I know you can go in and set them for the entire week and press the button on Yahoo that does it, but I still don't do it.
That button is also treacherous. If you ever try to make a move during the season, it undoes the whole button that you've done before. So
yeah, and so like just like that whole grind is just something that I don't really have the time and energy for anymore. And I'm convinced that there's some sort of like season long NBA best ball that could be really, really popular. And I know it's just like not as popular of a fantasy sport as football is, so it would never be as big as like the Best Ball Mania 3 stuff. But I'm sure you've thought about that a good amount. Do you have any feelings?
I think the biggest challenge to it, honestly, is the time of the season. So you'd be drafting for NBA stuff during a time that most people are really focused on NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest impediment to fantasy basketball becoming much, much bigger, is the fact that it's splitting attention time with NFL, and NFL is just such a dominant sport in our country. And so I play the underdog NBA best ball stuff. I think it's really high expected value relative to the competition that you're putting out there, because people really not many people are doing content. We do like a piece a year on it for the NBA side of things.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much content going on about how to beat it. I'm sure like Spike Week and some of the other sources will come out with stuff, but I love interacting with the NBA and these, much to what you were saying in terms of how I have friends that I tried to get into DFS and they were like, no, this sucks. Like, I'm not really into DFS. I had the same friends that I was like, hey, you might want to try this best ball thing. It's really fun. And during the season, they would text me every Monday with like where they are in their league and whatever. And then at the end of the year, they're like, I really want to do more of that next year. That was like super fun for me. And they also get a little glimpse into what my work life has been, because they're talking about portfolio of players and different things like that. And they're like, oh, I have 30% Raheem Mostert and different things like that. And they're like, oh, this pick's really working out for me. And so I think best ball really is a future for a lot of casual people to be able to interact with it. I'd love to see a better solution for NBA, like you're saying, Andy, because I think the NBA is a sport that it's so interesting. It's a sport that the people who love it are super, super passionate about it, but it's not as high overlap on those people putting money behind it in different ways. It's really interesting. Whereas NFL, there's so many people like who casually like NFL but love the gambling around it.
Yeah.
And there's not as much of that with the NBA.
For me, it's the variance.
Yeah.
Like, I just love how volatile the NFL is. Like, you just don't know.
Yeah.
Like, that 1 yard reception that's a touchdown is now the same as a 70-yard catch.
Yeah.
Or 6-yard catch. Like,
yeah.
It's just like in NBA, it's like, okay, I know this player's going to play 30 to 32 minutes. His usage rate's 30%. And take maybe this many shots. And it's just like, there's not really that chance for like the running back to put up 45 points. You don't have a Joe Mixon 55 burger out of nowhere. And there's like something about that just has me hooked in NFL that like I can't get from other sports.
I think that's right. College football is just a whole nother level. If you really want if you really want to see like dudes breaking off 80-yard touchdowns left and right, and the scores are just flying. Like,
I used to try, I think back in 2014 or so, FanDuel had like daily college sports too. Yeah. And I was doing those, and that was bad. Yeah. That was not it.
They are fun.
So as far as your NBA season-long strategy stuff goes, you said you felt it was pretty plus EV. Was there any particular reasons or anything?
So I think there's structural stuff that people don't get, like the same stuff with NFL. Like you can only get 2 scorers out of the bigs position, which is essentially centers in underdog, and you see people drafting like 5 to their team or whatever, and it's just, you're just a lot of dead roster spots. People underestimate how much more likely you are to get scores from guards late in the draft than you are from wings or bigs, just because guards injuries happen, like campaign Tyus Jones, when John Morant or Chris Paul go down. Those guys are scoring points that will actually contribute. So it's a lot of structural things. And then I also think people get too concerned about like the bad teams, and like they're going to be tanking and different things like that. So you get some good value on players. Like I have a lot of Trey Jones this year.
Yeah. A lot of Spurs players, a lot of Pistons players.
Yeah, and look, stuff will happen. Like, Cade gets hurt, Devin Vassell gets hurt, whatever, stuff happens. But just generally, like, I think people did this the year before with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And during the time that the playoffs were, he was actually like one of the most impactful players. And then he got shut down afterwards. And so like people just like assume like bad team tank, avoid, and there's some value in there in understanding the ranges of outcomes on that stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like that's one of the bigger kind of like mental hurdles to taking like fantasy sports seriously in general, is like, just because you're even a bad player on a bad team doesn't mean that you're going to be a bad fantasy player.
Yeah, I mean, you play NBA DFS, and most nights the games you're watching are the worst teams in the league.
Yeah. It's like, oh wait, their entire starting roster's out with COVID. I gotta have this game on.
It's like Houston and San Antonio, baby. I don't care that Golden State's playing Boston tonight. Like the Spurs and the Rockets, there's like 250 total here. Like I'm invested.
Yeah. That was one of the things I really enjoyed when I was playing NBA DFS more seriously. It was like having that like random any given night invested in a game, because I think like it actually really made me enjoy, not that I didn't enjoy watching basketball already, but it gave me like a reason to watch a random team who I'm a Thunder fan. And so I'll watch the Thunder. They're fun to watch the rebuild, and like, I'll watch when good teams play each other, but I would never watch a Spurs Rockets game otherwise. And it was just like a really fun reason to be like, all right, let's turn this on and see what Jeremy Sochan or whatever his name is doing and all that. And that's always been fun. And that was something that like I kind of miss not really playing NBA DFS now, is like I don't find myself just watching a random basketball game quite as often.
I think it's one of the more interesting things around fantasy sports and sports fandom is you see all these stories about players getting like, hate tweets and DMs about different things and whatnot. And like my experience has been the exact opposite. Like I like more players in the league than I ever have before from playing these games. I'm not emotionally tied to laundry like I used to be as like a kid growing up. And so like I don't get this like level of rage when things go wrong inside of me for whatever reason. And so like I find so much more joy in watching a diverse set of players. And like I'm just like, oh, I love watching. And this is where I became like a huge Jokic fan like years ago, and I've been pretty vocal about it. And I love watching Jokic. I love watching Shea. I love watching just like talent around the league. And I find myself like, I don't know, realizing they're human beings more than like I'm just like rooting for some laundry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think fantasy sports for me has made it where I have a much healthier relationship with like watching and rooting for the athletes than I did before. And I think it's gotten this connotation that it's like the exact opposite, that people putting their money on things is going to make them like hate the players more and different things like that. And so it's always been interesting to me because it's had the exact opposite effect for me. And I've always thought that was like a potential positive for fantasy sports.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Do you have a favorite team this year who is an underdog?
I've just like, so in terms of like my like favorite teams to watch, like it's more about style of play than like up and coming interesting teams.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've bet a decent bit on the Cavs to be good this year, so it's been fun to watch them be good so far. I'm super invested in Jokic just personally. Like I kind of put my brand behind him like 6-7 years ago, and so like that's been really 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 fortunate. And so I'm really into seeing if Denver can actually like make noise in the playoffs this year if they're healthy. He's
been so good.
He's just outrageous, man.
It's so unique to watch him play. There's nobody else who
that's the thing
works like him.
That's the thing that I love about basketball in general is like we're so focused on athleticism because it is a sport filled with freak athletes, like absolute freak athletes, but skill is still such an important part of the sport, and we tend to overrate one and underrate the other. And I think we're seeing that dynamic change a little bit with Luka, with Jokic, with Steph.
And now with Jalen Brunson even.
Yeah, exactly. With these guys who are, you know, if you were on the pendulum, they're way more on the skill side than the pure athleticism side. But man, like it's beautiful to watch. Yeah, in terms of like up and coming teams, I'm trying to think of I've invested a lot in the Orlando Magic. It is not working out. But I have a ton of Magic futures. I really am intrigued by their roster, and I think they're probably like 2 years away from being like really, really interesting.
Yeah.
But Franz is awesome. I don't think people realize how good Franz is.
He's really, really, really good.
I think he's like a top 20 player in the league, and people have no concept.
Yeah. Because no one watches the Orlando Magic.
No one watches the Orlando Magic, and because they run a lot of stuff through Paolo right now. Paolo's going to be very, very good. But most rookies are not, impactful to winning immediately. And he's learning, and he's a little bit of empty volume. But Franz is really, really good. If they ran a lot more stuff through Franz, I think they'd be even better. But I saw an opportunity in that division. So I have like Magic divisional futures and stuff because I just thought Miami is vulnerable, and I thought Atlanta's pretty vulnerable this year. So I guess the Magic. I watch a lot of Magic games.
I mean, they're a fun team to watch. Like I'm all in on the Bol Bol resurrection.
Bol Bol is it's so good.
Yeah, that's a blast.
Yeah.
And then I'm really curious to see as that team matures, because they have so many young players, like what ends up happening with like Cole Anthony and like Suggs and those guys is like, do one of them kind of figure it out and be like the CJ McCollum on the team or something?
They
and like,
need that badly.
Yeah,
they really would really badly.
Would do well with that.
Guard play has been a huge issue for them, and they were pretty shorthanded earlier in the year without Fultz, without Gary Harris, and without Cole, and they were relying on like RJ Hampton minutes, which were really, really challenging. Yeah. They're getting better now because they're getting better guard play. But they need somebody from that group, whether it's Fultz, whether it's Suggs, whether it's Anthony. They need somebody from that group to be like a legitimate good starting guard, and they haven't had that yet. And that's where there's a lot of disorganization. They turn the ball over a lot. Those are the things that happen with young teams. But they're really interesting with Franz, Wendell Carter Jr., and Paolo is just such a really strong core to work with. And then they have so many assets, so it'll be really interesting to see how they try to piece things together the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, the Wendell Carter Jr. trade worked out well for them.
Oh my God! As a former Bulls fan, I grew up with like living and dying with the Bulls, but I've just gotten away from that experience with fandom generally. But that trade, I loved Wendell Carter Jr. I thought he was going to be such a good NBA player. And I got when I was going through my divorce and through some tough times, one of my closest friends got me a cameo from Wendell Carter Jr. So like I love Wendell Carter Jr. Yeah. But yeah, I think they've got 3 really good young pieces there that they can build around, and I'm excited to see how they continue to do it. And the Bulls just such a disaster. I mean,
man, I was listening to one of the Ringer NBA podcasts. I don't remember which one, and they were saying that they now refer to that trade as the Wendell Carter Jr. trade because the name of the player who's the trade is about is whoeher the best player was in that trade.
Yeah,
it's not Vucevic anymore. It's Wendell Carter Jr.
No, I just like as a fan, just any team that goes all in for the upside of mediocrity just like drives me insane.
Mm-hmm.
It's just my least favorite thing in all of sports, and that's what the Bulls basically did. Was like, okay, like our ceiling is maybe we can win a round in the playoffs if everything broke right, and it's just such a bad bet to make.
Are you still a Bears fan?
Sort of. I would say their wins and losses do not impact me at all. I will say that the Texans' Hail Mary to win was very exciting for me, just because I was like, okay, like this is actually a path that they have now if they can turn this number 1 pick into a lot of pieces.
Are you in the camp that they should trade the pick as opposed to trade Fields?
So I'm in the camp that that I think it's a very hard conversation to have without understanding what the value the league puts on Fields is, because I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is that the value placed on the number 1 pick is way higher than the value placed on Fields.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, the disparity in those makes sense. But if they were close at all, I think you would trade Fields, and then they're so far away. So you just reset the clock on the rookie quarterback contract scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of 2 years into it, you take the rookie contract now and just hope that the guy is somewhat similar or better or whatever, and you reset that way. But I think the pieces would be so disproportionate in terms of what you could get for the number 1 pick that I think it's probably better to try to build through Fields. But he's an electrifying athlete that makes incredible big plays, and explosive big plays in the NFL are like how you win games, but you also win games by not turning the ball over and in not taking sacks. And so like, that's what Tom Brady's made his whole career out of, right? It's just like, I don't turn the ball over, I don't take sacks. And basically we just methodically move ourselves down the field. And he's very poor at those 2 things. Like,
well, thank God they have Chase Claypool now.
Oh my God. That trade, it was like a perfect season until that trade for if you're like roster building for the future, you're like, okay, like they're going to be bad, but Fields looks like possibly good. Like we'll see if there's talent there that can continue to be cultivated, and you're going to get a top pick, and you're going to get the top pick in the second round, and the Dolphins have forfeited a pick, so it's basically a second first round pick, but you're paying them second round money and like all these things. And then it's like, oh, they traded a second round for Chase Claypool. And I'm like, that's got to be the Ravens' second round that they got from Roquan Smith deal. I'm like, no, it's theirs. They traded theirs.
I'm convinced that trade is just because they beat the Patriots and they were like, maybe we can get frisky. Who knows?
I don't know. But all I know is like the combination of trading your own pick in that spot instead of Baltimore's, which is clearly going to be a worse pick, and being like, who doesn't know wide receiver evaluations? The Steelers. We're going to take the receiver the Steelers are ready to get rid of.
Yeah.
Like that seems like a bad strategy just as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been really interesting watching Fields. Like, it was so interesting to watch how much they unlocked him as the season progressed, where like very clearly they realized like, oh wait, he's really fast.
Yeah.
He's really fast.
Yeah.
And I just like, even in the games where he's doing that, some of the throws that he makes are just like not good.
No,
they're really, really bad.
I mean, there's never with him. There's never anything in the middle. Like the throws are either outrageous, and then you see like Byron Pringle trying to like haul in some like some perfectly thrown ball, and you're like, well, that's not the right guy to be doing that thing.
Yeah.
And then or they're just like at the feet of like a defender with no other receiver in like 15 yards, and you're like, what happened here? What were you even seeing? So there's a lot of stuff that and it's, I mean, it's a tough part of quarterback evaluation. I mean, this guy was playing with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson in college.
Yeah.
Like you play with those guys, it probably looks pretty good.
Yeah.
So, but it's the hard thing about figuring out this stuff. You had said the same thing with Burrow, with Chase and Jefferson, and Burrow is great. So like, it's really hard. I don't envy those guys in trying to figure out. And the thing that you're learning in the NFL is like how much coaching matters. Cause like, look at Daniel Jones. Brian Dable, like Daniel Jones looked like Mitch Trubisky for like the first 3 years. And then Brian Dable comes along, and all of a sudden like Daniel Jones is like, oh, like this guy can, like, you can win football games with this guy. It's crazy. So
I feel like I'm like the biggest Danny Jones truther, because like 2 years ago, he made me a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I've just been like, he has the upside. He's like white Lamar. Like he's out there just running the ball. Like
Vanilla Vic.
He's going in all these like best ball drafts like for free.
Yeah.
Like
he was my highest
pick
exposure
150 or something.
Yeah.
You're choosing between him or it's like.
Yeah, I had the opposite because I grew up in South Florida. All my friends are New York sports fans because if you grew up in South Florida, that's what happens. Everybody
don't root for Miami.
Just everybody from South Florida. Like nobody's originally from South Florida. Is the whole joke. They're all transplants. I'm like one of the few. I remember my college tennis coach when I'm on my recruiting trip was like, "So you were born in Florida?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "They have hospitals down there." He's like, "I thought people only died down there." And I was like, "No, I was born down there." But I have all these New York sports fans. And so when they drafted, Daniel Jones, I was like, this is like one of the most egregious picks analytics overall has ever said. And they're like, no, he's going to be good or whatever. And I was like, literally the analytics suggest none of that. Like that, I hope he is for your sake, but like, there's nothing to support any of this. And so like I was feeling very vindicated for many years about that position, and they had kind of come around to that. And then Dable comes in and like you get the best out of every like the dude's super talented, obviously, but every piece of talent is being maximized now.
Right, they have Richie James, Isaiah Hodgins, and Slayton.
It's crazy.
He's still getting yards.
It's crazy.
Bellinger.
It's crazy. I mean, you just see some of these guys, like you see what Kyle Shanahan does, like the coaching in the NFL. So like I was thinking about this the other day, like would you be more excited if you had what you deemed was a franchise quarterback, or like would you be more excited if you had Trevor Lawrence or Brian Dable? And I think most people would say Trevor Lawrence like very quickly, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, we saw Trevor under Urban.
Yeah,
I mean Urban,
but that's the thing, right?
NFL
like, and then Doug Peterson, like, and it's like, oh, this is the number one pick.
Yeah, I think maybe part of the equation is like, is it Trevor Lawrence in his second year, or is it Trevor Lawrence in his like eighth year?
Yeah,
I do think there's a certain amount of like, once you've kind of had some level of coaching and are an established quarterback, if your coach really sucks, you can kind of just be like, no, fuck you. Like, I'm going to call audibles. Like, I feel like you see that happen with Brady sometimes. Like, I feel like even we saw that a lot in like the Panthers game where they made it to the playoffs, where it was just like kind of obvious that Brady took over the calling of the offense in the second half. But yeah, like I think like Shanahan and these guys where it's like, how many quarterbacks can they go through? Like Shanahan is just he is a top 10 quarterback.
Yeah.
And what he can scheme in the offense and what he can do just makes you at a certain level kind of baseline.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting.
I wonder how much Mike Kafka has to do with it too, because I only know him through Punks. Like he got into Punks in 2021. And I'm like, wait, you're like the quarterback coach from Mahomes?
Yeah.
What the fuck? And then like next year, now he's with Daniel Jones. Like might be something there too, because
for sure. And I mean, you look at like the work that was done with Josh Allen in Buffalo, where they just like spent so much time reworking footwork and mechanics, and then all of a sudden he's just a monster. And like it's really interesting to me. Like and unfortunately, like, you know, the way the NFL does things, they just keep recycling the same coaches, which is like
bring in some new talent.
Like there's got to be.
Well,
it's insane too. Lovie Smith somewhere else.
Yeah.
The talent disparity of coaches in the NFL is just insane.
It's really
like
wild.
You think about some of these teams and what they're playing with. Like you have Cliff Kingsbury or like Matt Rule or something, and then you see the other coaches actually know what they're doing, and like there just have to be other people in between those two sets of coaches.
Yeah, they're just not tried.
Yeah.
It's
weird how like how much nepotism almost there is in a way. Like it's like if you know,
it's like every industry.
Yeah,
it's true. It's just humans.
Yeah,
it's our base operating system.
It is
of being around people we're comfortable with. But switching up the conversation a little bit, like I think something that is really cool that you do is the Wellymaker.
Yeah,
and I kind of just want to dive in. Like, how did the Wellymaker start? How did you learn about charity water? And you know, how much have you raised on it?
I did some research on that, I can tell you.
So it basically started, I was just listening to, I used to listen to Bill Simmons' podcasts, and one of the episodes he had, Scott Harrison, who founded Charity Water, was on, and I listened to the episode, and I was just like totally moved. And
I had the same experience.
Scott had this story that really resonated with me because he was a club promoter in New York, and he was doing a lot of work that was helping people with disposable income spend that money, right? And so that like really relates to me, what I'm doing in the DFS space and whatnot. And he felt like he wasn't really doing anything that was contributing to the world. And I was like, yeah, I'm not really doing anything that's contributing to the
Yeah.
world. Like ultimately when I make, and I've had like a lot of issues coming to grips with like what I do for a living. Cause you know, at the base level, I'm like, you know, taking money from someone else who's competing. Right. And obviously the business stuff is different and whatnot, but like the professional DFS playing side is like, okay. And like, am I doing that from people who have problems with gambling and different, like there's a lot of like stuff that just like I had to kind of deal with. And so I was like, okay, I don't feel like I'm really making a positive impact on the world with the stuff that I'm doing. And I was like, okay, I want to try to raise money. And at the time he was talking about like a water project is $10,000. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try to raise $10,000 with the ultimate goal of like, you know, if the community isn't into it, whatever, like I'll fund a water project and we'll move on. And so I started this campaign 6 years ago now. And my goal was to raise $10,000, and the community like responded immediately. I raised $10,000 in a day. And I was like, okay, like I guess there's more willingness to give than I expected in this community. And so it kind of started from there. And I think in the first Wellymaker campaign, I think we raised like $40,000, something like that. And each year, you know, I had more and more success with DFS, and I just really realized like how lucky I was to be born into a country, into a family that had means. Clean water, clean drinking water was never a concern for me. It was never on the radar. Like there's a lot of great charities that a lot of great causes that I'd love to support. I'd love to support more stuff in education, but charity water itself, their goal to have 100% of all donations go to water projects. Their goal to be transparent and give you information about where your money goes, and give you updated information on like coordinates and pictures of the well or water system, however they build it. Like to keep you engaged and invested in the experience is just so good. And that's what I wanted a partner that I felt like if people gave to, they'd feel good about it, right? Like I didn't want a partner that if people gave to, they'd be getting hounded like every year with pamphlets of like, hey, give again. And we didn't tell you what we did with the money, but like we still would like some more money. And that's kind of the model in charity. And I think it's one that makes people feel not invested and not part of the process. And Charity Water seemed to do that. And the more that I got experience with them over the years, the more that has played out. We've now done 6 Wellymaker campaigns, and we've raised over $600,000 in total. My goal is to hopefully raise over $1 million in the course of my lifetime. And the whole idea was, for me, it was like, okay, like I made, you know, $1 million in this one DFS tournament, and like that one day changed my life. You know, how can I give back the equivalent of that in whatever way, shape, or form? So each and every year, and I have a silent partner who's extremely generous in matching donations as well. But the two of us commit to matching the first $40,000 in donations, and sometimes more depending on how the DFS year goes and whatnot. But it's been great, and it's been amazing to see the community. And there's so many times over the last years where there's been a pandemic, there's been natural disasters. I remember the hurricanes that hit Houston really hard were during a time that I was raising money during September for a campaign. I just remember there's so many different causes that, you know, could captivate people's attention, and in different years, different things. I mean, this year economically is a lot different than last year for a lot of people in terms of being able to give and different things. And each and every year, like people keep showing up and keep supporting, and that part is really cool. And a lot of people will give me credit for like the campaign and stuff. And really all I do is I set up a webpage. I work with somebody at Charity Water. They set up the webpage. They tell me like it's live, and then I tweet about it. Like I do nothing, right? Like I'm not doing anything for the charity other than like using my platform, but it's been really cool to see people want to show up, and that feels really personal, and that feels like people wanting to show up for me as much as they do the charity. And that stuff's super rewarding.
Yeah,
I know last year we were inspired to do one with Lucky Trader going through Charity Water, and it was the same thought process. Like, hey, these people are giving 100% of the funds to the actual goal. And it's not 80% going to administration, 20% going, and it's completely transparent. It's like, these are where the wells are. Like you said, the coordinates. Like I feel like bringing along the donors for the ride is the way to do it, because it's like every year you're like, okay, this is a good year, this is a bad year, this is how much I can give. But you know it's going to an effective place. It's not going to, Susan
Yeah.
B. Komen or whatever.
Yeah.
And it just feels a lot better. It's like, all right,
Yeah.
I'm giving money to it's actually helping people and not just lining some administrator's pockets.
Yeah. They do such an incredible job at storytelling as well at Charity Water. They're just they're fantastic storytellers. And at the end of the year, I've gotten videos from the, local villages and different things with people saying thank you and different, it's really, and just the stories you hear of children who just didn't have access to the type of life that we have access to simply because they didn't have clean drinking water, right? Their lifespan risks are huge.
And it's we don't get to choose that. It's like
Yeah.
RNG. You're just in an egg,
Exactly.
chilling.
Exactly.
And then, boom, you're activated.
Exactly.
You're dropped in a map that is the world. And you're in your spot with your tribe.
Yeah.
And you don't realize as a kid, oh, I'm lucky.
Yeah.
And
You have
then
no
now
idea.
it's holy shit. I could have had really bad luck. We got a
Yeah.
top 5% outcome
yeah.
on that dice roll.
Yeah.
We could have been.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. You hear these stories of women walking 6 hours a day, one each way, to just fill up a jug of water to bring it back, and that's their whole day. And it's well, how is someone supposed to have, how are they supposed to have a more productive life? How are they supposed to continue to grow as a society when people are spending all their time doing these things? Or you hear stories about young women. When there's no toilets in schools and whatnot, and young women get their periods for the first time, and then they're ashamed and they never go back to school and different things. And so all these different ways that clean water impacts education and people's ability to create a better life for themselves and commerce and different things. And it's just such a base level thing. It's why the things I'd love to be able to continue to attack in charity are the most basic things, like education, clean access to clean drinking water. Those things I think would be the best society we can build are things where those are a foundational aspect of it for everybody.
Yeah, totally. I had a very similar experience listening. I think it's one of the few Bill Simmons podcasts I've listened to multiple times.
Yeah.
Where I heard it and I was like, oh, wow. And I mean, when that came out, I was probably in high school or college.
Yeah.
And I made my parents listen to it in the car or something.
Yeah.
I've
sent that podcast to hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And Scott's an incredible speaker and storyteller. But he's so captivating that the context, and Andy will know, having listened to this exact podcast, but the context is Scott was speaking at an event that Bill was at, and Bill basically grabbed him after the event and was like, I need to have you on my podcast. Mm-hmm. And they recorded the podcast late that night. They're both delirious, talking through the podcast. It's got to be 3 or 4 in the morning.
Yeah.
And he's doing the podcast. And I'm just so the idea that Bill Simmons was so captivated by this speech that he was I have to have you on the podcast, and now's my opportunity to do it, and we're doing it now, is just exactly how I felt listening to the podcast. Was I need other people to hear this.
Yeah. And I also think that they've done such a good job. They've done a good job in a lot of things, but I really liked their whole birthday campaign. And so they have this campaign that they do, which I did years ago and raised $150 or something. But it was it's to donate your birthday. Mm-hmm. And basically they have this whole thing set up where you can put your birthday on there and basically say, in lieu of birthday presents this year, I'd like for you to donate to my campaign. I thought that was a really thoughtful and easy way to feel good and do that. And I remember after that, I even applied to work there after I was graduating from college.
So I went through a few years ago, and I'd gotten divorced, and I was dead set on moving to New York and starting over, and I was looking at maybe getting out of DFS entirely and just kind of chilling. And I was talking with Charity Water, and I was like, "Is there anything I can do?" And we went through the whole org chart together, with me and a couple of my contacts over there. And we just I just came to the conclusion I needed to be able to make more money than working in charity to live in New York at the time that I was trying to transition and do the things that I wanted to do. And so I was I think I can be more impactful doing the things that I'm doing here than actually working for the organization and whatnot. But it's an awesome culture. The people there are amazing. I'm so lucky to work with the people that I do work with that support me, and we're friends. We're friends. I text with my rep all the time, and she texts me when she's running the marathon. She's like, "Hey, do you want to come support me in the marathon?" And it's just it's a great group of people, and they do incredible work.
That's awesome.
Incredible work.
Goes back to the beginning where we talk about being in investment banking and looking at the qualitative things and not the quantitative. It's the culture there is just rock solid.
Yeah.
And you can bet on them to keep being the way they are.
Yeah. They're just awesome.
So I want to be mindful of time here. I think we're probably getting up to when you have to get out of here.
I could go another 20 minutes if you want.
All right. Cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, we'll ask our question in like 10 minutes.
All right. Yeah. Well, then in that case, I really need to pee.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
I'm going to go
So
to the
we'll do a little
bathroom.
cut.
Break it.
Yeah. Yeah. Give me like.
Okay.
All right. We're back.
Back from Andy's tea break.
Yeah. It was good. It was really needed, honestly. I feel
They're speed run.
I was getting pretty uncomfortable, if I'm being totally honest.
I was glad you didn't use the bottle at the table, just like very nonchalantly. That would
Yeah. I mean, we have too many cameras for that.
just like, what's going on?
Yeah. Well, I was like, can I unbutton my pants so it's not like pushing
Like,
against my bladder?
I'm like going
Like-
back to my RuneScape speedrunning days where I need to sit in the chair for 6 hours straight, and I'm like, well, like if I get up, that's like a minute of efficiency gone. Like I'm not going to break the record.
So outside of outside of sports stuff, do you have any other like things that you do for fun, or is your for fun still just like sitting down and watching a basketball game or football or?
So I like games just generally.
Mm-hmm.
So like my fiance and I puzzle. I like escape rooms.
Mm-hmm.
I like things where I can like try to figure stuff out. I like board games.
I'm a really big board game guy.
Yeah, I'm not like super big because I just don't like, I play Ticket to Ride on my phone like a ton. But I don't have like a wide breadth of board games. Leone usually introduces board games to me that I then get obsessed with because I lose to him and then I'm like, I'm never losing to him again. And then
You
I
play them in person.
So whenever I go visit Mike in Buffalo, we'll play with like him and his wife, and depending on the game, his son, if it's age appropriate. And then most of the gaming that I do is on my phone.
Yeah.
And it's like my way to unwind, or my way after a bad night to feel good about myself, like to get a win.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Like after like a bad night, I'm like, I just need a win to end this day, which, I'm still working through in therapy. But yeah, I think most of my free time, I do love sports. Like I do enjoy sports, and I don't necessarily need a sweat to enjoy sports. But yeah, just like games and then for me, like close, intimate, personal relationships and like really close friends and just time. Like I don't care what I'm doing. I care about the people I'm spending time with.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, how my free time is like divvied up.
Nice.
I think I've learned that personally a lot just doing this podcast, like thinking about who I'm spending time with, having longer conversations with people, and just like being present.
Yeah.
And not wrapped in my phone in Twitter land all the time.
I think that's one of the reasons we like doing this. It's one of the main reasons we like doing this podcast in person.
Yeah.
Is like if we were to try to do a 2-hour Zoom call and talk to you like this, it just would be a totally different conversation.
It's totally different. The number of notifications that
Yeah.
I would have going on my screen that are like pinging me that I'm like, I kind of need to pay attention to that. Or like this is one of these things that happens like when I'm doing live shows and whatnot, and we're trying to manage information and projections, and we're trying to run a prop service, and I'm like on the air and I'm seeing all this stuff happen in the background. I'm like trying to find a moment where Gallagher or Gary or someone will be talking that I can like respond. And so it's very different in terms of the attention that you can give to something when you're in person and off the devices.
Yeah.
That was 100%. I did so many Twitter spaces. I've done so many virtual podcasts. I'm just like, I cannot give you more than 20 minutes of my undivided attention in a virtual setting. Yeah. I'm looking at Telegram, Discord, Twitter, whatever. Yeah. It's, we're playing whack-a-mole with notifications all the time in this information economy. It's like, oh, there's a red thing. I need to go look at that red thing. And it's like this never-ending fucking trail of red dots that you're just responding to or ignoring depending on urgency and importance.
It's like I check my phone to see what time it is, make sure we're on time. And it's like, I have a Signal message, I have a Telegram message, I have a Slack message.
I got a Ring doorbell notification. I'm like, is Mrs. D's okay? Like, is someone breaking in? Like, it's probably just a package, but like...
Yeah.
I have one other question for you about DFS stuff, and then we can wrap it up. What was the motivation to go into the solver and kind of the more like, have you done a lot of projection stuff and like the content side? What made you want to start dabbling in the more like toolsy side of it as well?
So in terms of the business side of things?
And maybe the answer is just like, I think it's interesting.
Yeah. But. So I think, the answer is more so that, we've had this business and the business keeps evolving, right? And at ETR, when they brought me on, I had run a site and founded a site that was a little bit more tools centric. And I'd had all these conversations with Taylor and Adam and Andrew about like, yeah, I get like the audience you guys are trying to serve, because they really wanted to keep it simple for people that were coming in. They're like, we really want to serve the casual player. And we feel like we can have content and projections that are good enough for the pro player, but we really want the site to look like it's accessible for the casual player in terms of how they're accessing Evan Silva's information or Adam Levitan's information. And I was like, okay, well, like I'm a DFS player that plays tournaments and I use optimizers, and like my content talks through, if you want me to talk tournaments, I got to talk through this content, because most people are going to hand build a few lines, but there are people out there that are using optimizers and they're probably using them wrong. And I feel like I need to address that. And so we talked more about it, and we talked about like having this partnership with Fantasy Labs at the time, which has been a really good partnership for us, and they've been a great partner. But over time, you just learn through these partnerships, like, hey, it would be great if we had a little bit more control over the situation. We weren't at the mercy of someone else's technology or someone else's systems or different things like that. So we wanted to make that investment. And Taylor really like pushed it to kind of make that investment. We had some people that we were connected to that were looking to do this as well. So it was kind of like they had the motivation, like they wanted to build this thing. And we were like, okay, well, we would kind of benefit from you building this thing. So why don't we figure out how to make the partnership work? And we've kind of structured it that way. And it's great. I mean, there's so many times where I've had ideas on things and I'm like, is this an idea I should be sharing with because while we have a partnership, they're also a competitor.
Yeah.
So it's like I have this idea that I think could really help. And look, we did a lot of troubleshooting, and I think a lot of the innovations on Labs products have been through some of the troubleshooting and some of the conversations we've had. But there were definitely things where I had hesitancy, where I was just like, I don't know if this is the right thing ultimately long-term to do. And so it feels a little cleaner doing all these things. And obviously we're still trying to build up that side of the business and earn credibility in that space. And it's been quick to try to build it in season during
it's been
NFL.
Crazy to see it come up. Like I remember getting an email, I think in like August or so. I might be misremembering it. It was like in the summer sometime. The Jennings sent out the email to Sports Boys and was like, "Oh yeah, we're acquiring." Like, "Oh, okay, cool." And I'm like, "I'll probably be ready next season." And then like a couple weeks later, I'm like, I can like log in.
Those guys are outrageously good at what they do. And I want to be very clear. I work nothing on the product outside of like just sending some Telegram ideas every once in a while. Like it is the dream job for me. I'm just the idea guy who just like spouts off something, and then these wonderful people like turn it into something that makes sense. So I have very little actual work that I do with it on a day-to-day basis outside of like trying to think through what the best way is to grow that side of the business and how to best incorporate that into the content that we're producing so that people who are using optimizers can use them more intelligently. Because like I said, I think so many people just think of an optimizer as like it has the answers and I just have to press the button, or it has the answers and if I just program the rules the right way, I'll get the right result. And I'm trying to express to people, it's not a slot machine. It's a way for you to take what's in your head and put it onto paper. Mm-hmm. And so like what you're trying to do with the optimizer is put together a template for how you want your lineups to look. There's not a right answer or a wrong answer. You'll find out at the end of the night if it was right or wrong, or there's things you could do better or different things to get the lineups to look the way you want. But I think most people think of an optimizer as like, the answers are in there. I just need to hit the codes the right way. Like, down, left, right, up, and $1
million
unlocks $1 million. And it's like, no, that's not really how it works. So trying to have a partnership that I can continue to provide education on people how to use those tools is important.
Nice. That's great. Our last question that we ask everybody is, if you were to write an autobiography, what would the title of it be?
So I've thought a little bit about some stuff like this because I think ultimately down the road, I want to do probably a podcast series, probably like really short, like a 10 episode podcast series or something like that about sort of self-development and, picking yourself back up from lows and different things like that. And so I've thought about a lot of different names, but I haven't settled on anything yet. I think it'd be something about, my fiance would joke that I'd say, "What do you win when you win?" Because she's joked that that's my catchphrase. But it would probably be something, it could be something like that, but it would probably be something about something about like just investing in yourself. And I don't mean that in a way like, I think a lot of people think about that through like professionally or like fitness or different things like that. But I think just like a lot of I needed to change a lot of my perspectives in terms of living a life that was very scarcity minded and changing to a growth mindset and like really embracing that. So it would be something about investing in myself in that in some way, shape or form. It could be what do you win when you win.
I like that.
Yeah.
I want to see some self-development from Dink.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on the subject and the content. I have unfortunately the same usual constraints that I have, which is like, I don't think I'm going to be good enough to do this the right way. Have all sorts of all sorts of concerns about being in all sorts of imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
where like, oh, like I won't have all the data to back up, like, and but there's a lot of stuff that I really learned a lot by diving into it myself, and especially divorce. Like I think I want to talk a lot about divorce, and I think how it's like very taboo in our culture in ways that a lot of people like don't really understand. So I've been workshopping some things, but I think this is probably a few years out.
I mean, I'm excited.
Send out the links when it happens.
Yeah, younger, or I mean, not 30 yet, but I any advice I can get from someone like you, I will consume it. So like, please put it out.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how similar most human beings' experiences are from like 20s to 30s to 40s. So I am close to turning 41, and my 30s, and I think this is for a lot of people, my 30s, 20s is just like trying to figure out like who you are as a human being. And then 30s is like trying to prove yourself. And there's like all this like chip of like trying to like drive yourself further in your career and like prove yourself and like status and like, and then you sort of like hit your late 30s and you sort of hit this period where you're like, why am I doing all that? Like, what's that really worth? Like, is that really moving the needle for me at the end of the day? And then I think you start to settle into this period where you're like, okay, like what are the things that actually make me happy that aren't derived from other people's expectations of me?
You're like kind of bucking the mimetic desire.
Yeah.
Where you're like, how do I figure out what I really value without society's pressure?
And so then you go through that period of time, and then I'm sure there's like some just like acceptance of like, okay, I'm old now, and like this is like what I enjoy doing, and I'm just like stubborn in my ways, and like that's the natural cycle of life. But it's really interesting. I think there's like a ton of growth that happens in your 30s. And I think it's from talking to a lot of my friends, it's very similar for a lot of people. And I think people nowadays are getting more comfortable sharing and talking about it.
Yep.
Definitely. I feel like that's what I love to talk about, is just like open up about personal experiences and show the world like how similar we all are. We're all humans with the same operating system, thinking very similar things, but then we hit imposter syndrome or times where we feel super alone and isolated. And it's like, no, there's like 8 billion people in the world, all using the same brain. It's like, we're very fucking similar. That I think, and I really think like ultimately like the meaning of life is essentially like trying to recognize and understand the range of human emotions and interactions through other people. Like, because you're always thinking through yourself that you're like, am I weird for this? Is this how everybody's doing it or whatever? And like just like spending time trying to learn how other people are experiencing the world in the same and in different ways, and understanding that range, I think is like the whole purpose of like what we're supposed to be doing here. Trying to fully understand the entire spectrum of human experience.
Yeah. I think that's like the entire meaning of life. And the only way you can do that is through interacting with other humans.
Yeah, that's true. You're not going to get that at home in a dark
You can't like
room.
read it. You can't read it in a book, because even if you read it in a book, you're interpreting it in your own way, right? You're not like, you might be hearing someone else talk about it, but in how it impacted them, but you're not feeling that experience in the same way. So like, yeah. And the more experiences you get from talking to people, the more you realize that like, yeah, everybody's going through the same stuff. And everybody's just trying to do their best.
And so many people just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Like I know earlier we talked about therapy a little bit.
Yeah.
I know where.
Yeah, I think depending on how hard your out
It's
is.
not
here.
that hard.
All right.
Yeah.
I
I actually had my therapist canceled on me earlier today, so
Oh.
it's not that hard.
I do have a call at 11:30, but I can be a few minutes late. I'll be fine.
Okay. Yeah, we can wrap it up. Drew, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah.
This has been crazy.
Yeah, it's been
I've
fun.
been following you for 9 years. Like, that to me is fucking crazy. I was like a young college student, and now it's like we're here able to talk and go deep on all things life. And
Yeah.
just thank you so much, man.
Yeah,
No,
it's two people with less than 365 days until we're in our 30s. Any life advice is greatly
Yeah,
appreciated.
that's
I appreciate you guys having me on. I appreciate the conversation. I think these are great ways to continue to like learn about human experience in general. It's just having these close conversations. So you guys keep me young with all the crypto talk and trying to learn a new space in a soft market and try to figure things out. So I appreciate that.
you keep us honest with things like bankroll management. Not blowing ourselves up. So it's two ends of the
Yeah.
spectrum.